On February 19, 2015, 16-year-old Becky Watts vanished from her home in St. George, Bristol, without warning. She had been at home that morning while her stepmother, Angie Galsworthy, went to a doctor's appointment. When Angie returned, Becky was gone, but nothing looked suspicious. Her phone, laptop, and personal belongings were still in her room. Her bed was made. There were no signs of forced entry or struggle. Becky's father, Darren Galsworthy, assumed she had gone to meet a friend. But as the hours passed and Becky failed to contact anyone, not even her boyfriend, concern turned into panic. The next morning, she was reported missing to the police. Detectives launched an immediate high-risk missing person investigation. Volunteers helped distribute posters, and police began reviewing CCTV footage, combing nearby woods, and interviewing friends, neighbors, and family members. Becky's face quickly appeared across national news, with emotional pleas from her parents urging the public for help. But there were no sightings, no social media updates, no clues. The silence was chilling. Attention soon turned to those who had been in the house that day. Among them was Nathan Matthews, Becky's 28-year-old stepbrother. He had briefly visited the family home that morning, supposedly to collect tools. Nathan didn't show much concern during the search, and both he and his girlfriend, Shauna Hoare, gave brief but cold interviews to police. Something didn't sit right. On March 2, nearly 2 weeks after Becky's disappearance, police searched a property connected to Nathan. In a shed, they discovered suitcases. Inside were dismembered human remains. DNA confirmed the unthinkable. They belonged to Becky Watts. The case had taken a devastating turn, from a missing person investigation to a brutal homicide. And worse still, the killer wasn't a stranger. It was someone from within her own family circle. What had happened to Becky behind the closed doors of her own home? And why had Nathan Matthews done something so unthinkable? The truth would unfold in the most chilling way. Rebecca Marie Watts, known as Becky, was born on June 3, 1998, in Bristol, England. She was a bright, sensitive, and creative teenager who loved music, writing, and being around her close-knit group of friends. Becky had a complicated family structure. Her parents, Tanya Watts and Darren Galsworthy, separated when she was young. Darren later married Angie, and Becky split her time between her biological mother's house and her father's home in St. George, where she eventually lived full-time. Growing up, Becky struggled with social anxiety and body image issues, partly due to bullying in school. Despite this, she was making progress, seeing a counselor, regaining confidence, and even planning to study health and social care. She was shy in public, but warm and playful with people she trusted. Those who knew Becky described her as caring, funny, and quietly strong. She was especially close to her father, often referring to him as her hero. She was also in a steady relationship with her boyfriend and maintained regular contact with her friends through social media. Becky was protective of her personal space. She didn't like being touched unexpectedly and often avoided conflict, but she also had a quiet determination and independence. In the months leading up to her death, she had begun standing up for herself more and asserting her boundaries, especially with people she found uncomfortable. One of those people, it seemed, was her stepbrother, Nathan Matthews. Although they dated through marriage, Becky had never been close to Nathan. He was much older, withdrawn, and reportedly made her feel uneasy. While no formal complaints had been made, friends later revealed that Becky had felt awkward around him, especially when he stared at her or made inappropriate comments. Despite her inner struggles, Becky was slowly rebuilding her self-esteem. She was excited about her future and had plans for college. She had people who loved her deeply and supported her journey. That's what made her disappearance so devastating. She wasn't the kind of teenager to run away or seek attention. She had no history of disappearing before. Her sudden silence, online and offline, was out of character. To understand the impact of Becky's death, one must understand the life she was building. A quiet fighter, a loving daughter, a girl just beginning to feel good about herself again. And then, she was gone. By the morning of February 20th, 2015, Becky Watts had been missing for over 24 hours. Her father, Darren Galsworthy, and Angie were consumed with worry. It was unlike Becky to leave without telling anyone, and completely out of character for her to be unreachable. The police immediately categorized her as a high-risk missing person due to her age and mental health history. A full-scale search operation began across Bristol. Officers knocked on doors, questioned neighbors, and gathered CCTV footage. They also began tracing her digital footprint, checking phone records, social media accounts, and possible travel routes. Public involvement was swift. Flyers were distributed across the city. Friends, classmates, and community members volunteered to help in search efforts. Becky's story made headlines in local and national news. Her father gave emotional interviews pleading for her safe return. But day after day passed without progress. Becky hadn't used her phone, hadn't withdrawn any money, and hadn't messaged anyone. There was no evidence she'd left the house voluntarily. Her laptop and personal items were still at home. Her bed was made. The door had been locked from the inside when Angie returned that morning. Something didn't add up. Investigators considered every possibility. Did Becky run away? Was she abducted? Had she met someone online? They looked into her relationships and interviewed her friends. All described her as shy, sweet, and not the type to vanish willingly. Attention slowly shifted toward the people who had last seen her. One name kept reappearing: Nathan Matthews, Becky's stepbrother. Nathan had stopped by the family house that morning, allegedly to pick up tools. He stayed for only a short time, according to Angie. But when police spoke to him, they noticed his demeanor was stiff and his answers were rehearsed. He seemed detached from the growing urgency of the investigation. Nathan's live-in girlfriend, Shauna Hoare, also spoke with officers. She insisted they had nothing to do with Becky's disappearance. But her story closely mirrored Nathan's. Too closely, some officers thought. Still, there was no hard evidence. No body, no crime scene. Only a missing girl, a grieving family, and a gnawing sense that something terrible had already happened. As days turned into weeks, hope began to fade. Police were no longer just searching for a lost teenager. They were beginning to suspect they were chasing a cover-up. And somewhere in Bristol, Becky's body was already hidden. As the days dragged on with no sign of Becky Watts, investigators began to turn their attention inward, to those closest to her. While public appeals continued and volunteers searched Bristol's parks, alleys, and woodlands, detectives quietly started re-examining the timeline of February 19th. The house showed no signs of forced entry. No neighbors reported screams or disturbances. Becky had seemingly vanished into thin air, but only a few people were home that morning. One of them was Nathan Matthews, her 28-year-old stepbrother. Nathan was Darren's son from a previous relationship. Though technically Becky's stepbrother, their relationship was distant and awkward. Friends would later reveal that Becky had felt Nathan creepy and didn't like being around him. He often stared at her and made uncomfortable remarks. Police interviewed Nathan early on. He claimed he had gone to the Galsworthy house that morning to pick up tools and had only stayed a few minutes. His story didn't raise alarms at first, but his lack of concern did. He wasn't actively helping in the search, didn't check in with the family, and seemed emotionally disconnected from the crisis. His live-in girlfriend, Shauna Hoare, was also questioned. Just 21 at the time, she appeared calm but overly rehearsed in her answers. She insisted she and Nathan had stayed home all day watching TV and smoking cannabis. When asked about Becky, she described her coldly, saying she found her spoiled and annoying. Red flags were starting to pile up. Detectives obtained a warrant to search Nathan and Shauna's small flat in Barton Hill. On the surface, the place looked ordinary, but something caught their attention. A strong chemical smell, out of place in a home with no cleaning in progress. The air felt thick. One officer later said, "It didn't feel right." Cadaver dogs were brought in. Forensics began scouring the premises. Meanwhile, digital analysts began digging into Nathan and Shauna's search history and messages. What they found was disturbing. Searches like how to kidnap a teenage girl, dismemberment methods, and body decomposition times. It was no longer just suspicion. It was becoming a probable homicide. But there was still no body, no confession, no trace of Becky. Police needed something solid, something physical, and they were about to find it. Because Nathan and Shauna had made a critical mistake. They had hidden Becky's remains, but not well enough. As police delved deeper into the lives of Nathan Matthews and Shauna Hoare, a disturbing portrait began to emerge. One of quiet obsession, dark fantasies, and a toxic relationship built on secrecy and control. Nathan Matthews was 28, unemployed and largely isolated from the rest of the Galsworthy family. As suspicion tightened around Nathan Matthews and Shauna Hoare, investigators turned their focus to the digital trail they left behind, a disturbing window into the couple's dark minds. Search warrants were obtained for both of their phones, laptops, and online accounts. What investigators found confirmed what they already feared. This was not a spontaneous act. It was a planned and deeply disturbing crime. Nathan's phone contained a long history of Google searches in the weeks before Becky's disappearance. Among them, how to knock someone out quickly. Can you put someone in a suitcase? Teenage girl kidnapping stories. Body decomposition in cold weather. Equally chilling were the notes and downloads stored on his laptop, including step-by-step guides on suffocation techniques and how to clean up blood. It was the kind of digital evidence that left little doubt about premeditation. But it wasn't just Nathan. Shauna's phone showed that she was far more involved than she claimed. She had exchanged messages with Nathan in the days before Becky's death, joking about kidnapping girls and referring to Becky in cold, cruel terms. In one text message just days before the murder, Shauna wrote, "Just bring her here and we'll shut her up." Nathan replied, "Yeah, that'd teach her." They claimed it was sarcasm. Investigators weren't convinced. Even more damning was Shauna's internet history. It revealed searches for how to hide a body, dismemberment tools, do police check drains for DNA. Together, their digital footprints painted a picture of two people fantasizing about control, violence, and domination, possibly influenced by extreme pornography and a shared contempt for Becky. Officers also discovered they had downloaded episodes of TV crime shows involving teenage kidnappings and murder. Some were watched just days before Becky's death. It appeared the couple may have even rehearsed their crime right down to the cleanup. The forensic team knew this was the break they needed. The couple had left behind no confession, but their devices were talking, and what they said was damning. But police still needed a physical link to Becky's fate, so they returned to Nathan's flat for a deeper forensic search. And this time, they followed the trail to a nearby garden shed where something horrifying waited inside. On March 2, 2015, more than 10 days after Becky Watts vanished, police returned to the small flat shared by Nathan Matthews and Shauna Hoare in Barton Hill, Bristol. This time, they weren't just searching, they were expecting answers. Forensic teams had already noted a strong chemical smell during an earlier visit. Something had felt off, too clean, too quiet. Now, armed with search warrants and cadaver dogs, they prepared for a deeper inspection. Inside, the flat looked cramped but ordinary at first glance. But beneath the surface, detectives began to find troubling clues. Cleaning products, bleach, air fresheners, and disinfectants were everywhere. A mattress had been removed, curtains were missing. A section of the bathroom had been scrubbed so aggressively that paint had faded from the wall. But the most important discovery came from the garden shed of a nearby property, one connected to a friend of Nathan's, where he had reportedly visited shortly after Becky went missing. Inside the shed were 2 suitcases and several plastic storage boxes. When officers opened them, they found human remains, carefully wrapped in plastic bags, sealed with tape, and placed inside layers of bedding and material. The remains were dismembered, and each piece had been deliberately cleaned and packed. It was a horror scene, cold, calculated, and heartbreaking. DNA testing confirmed what everyone feared. The remains belonged to Becky Watts. News of the discovery sent shockwaves across the UK. What began as a hopeful search for a missing teenager had become a gruesome murder investigation. The story that had gripped Bristol now took a devastating turn, and the public wanted answers. That same day, Nathan Matthews was arrested and charged with murder. He initially claimed he had only wanted to scare Becky during a staged kidnapping, but that, quote, went wrong. Investigators didn't believe him. Shauna Hoare was also arrested. Though she denied involvement in the murder itself, she was suspected of helping with the cleanup and disposal of the body. Forensic traces of Becky's blood were later found in their bathroom and on a glove belonging to Shauna. Police now knew the truth. Becky had been killed in her own home, dismembered in the flat, and hidden in a shed, all orchestrated by people her family had trusted. The shock and betrayal was immense. Becky's father, Darren, collapsed upon hearing the news. But the horror was only beginning. Soon, the world would hear the details of what Nathan and Shauna had done, and why. The moment detectives opened the suitcases inside the shed, the Becky Watts case moved beyond tragedy. It entered the realm of horror. Inside were body parts, carefully wrapped in bags and layers of fabric, then placed in boxes and luggage. A total of 8 separate packages were discovered, each methodically sealed. Some contained notes or markings for organization. It was as if Becky's body had been treated like something to be stored, not a person, not a daughter. The remains were later confirmed through DNA testing to be Becky's. She had been suffocated, likely using a duvet or a gloved hand over her mouth, and then dismembered with a circular saw in the bathroom of Nathan and Shauna's flat. Detectives believed the murder had occurred shortly after Nathan entered the Galsworthy home on February 19th. He had waited for Angie to leave for her appointment, then confronted Becky in her room. He would later claim he only wanted to, quote, scare her, possibly with the use of a stun gun he had purchased days earlier. But it was clear that this plan had always involved violence. Nathan had arrived with tape, gloves, and masks. This was never about scaring. It was a premeditated abduction and murder. The next step was just as cold-blooded. Nathan brought Becky's body back to his flat in a large bag and spent hours, maybe days, dismembering and cleaning. Forensics found traces of her blood in the bathroom and on the walls. The saw he used had been hidden under the bed. Shauna, during her police interviews, denied seeing or knowing anything. But her digital search history, messages, and fingerprints on bags told a different story. Prosecutors believed she was not only aware of the crime, but helped in planning and covering it up. On March 2nd, after the discovery of the body, Nathan Matthews was formally charged with Becky's murder, and Shauna Hoare was charged with perverting the course of justice and assisting an offender. Her role would come under further scrutiny as evidence continued to surface. The community of Bristol was devastated. Becky's friends and classmates left flowers and messages outside her school. Candlelight vigils were held in the park near her home. A family was shattered, a father broken, and the public outraged. Becky had been betrayed and destroyed by people who should have protected her. And now, the truth had a body count. Once Nathan Matthews and Shauna Hoare were in custody, detectives turned to a powerful tool, the interview room. What unfolded in those taped sessions would expose a twisted web of lies, detachment, and chilling confessions. Nathan was interviewed first. He appeared withdrawn, stiff, and robotic. After hours of questioning, he finally broke. He claimed he had intended to kidnap Becky, not kill her. His explanation was bizarre. He wanted to, quote, teach her a lesson for being disrespectful to his mother, and believed that scaring her would make her more grateful. He said he brought over a stun gun, handcuffs, and tape to carry out the plan. According to Nathan, the situation, quote, got out of hand. He admitted to suffocating Becky in her bedroom, placing his hand over her mouth while restraining her. She struggled, then went still. In his words, it was a mistake. But investigators weren't convinced. Why bring a stun gun, a face mask, and plastic wrap if you only meant to scare her? And what about the hours spent dismembering her body with a saw in the bathroom? Police believed Nathan's story was a partial confession, carefully crafted to reduce blame. His calm tone throughout the interview disturbed even seasoned officers. There were no tears, no regret. Meanwhile, Shauna Hoare told a different story. She denied everything. Shauna claimed she had no idea what Nathan had done. She said she thought Becky had run away and only realized something was wrong when Nathan told her to clean the flat. She insisted she never saw Becky's body and wasn't involved in any part of the murder or disposal. But detectives pressed her. Why did her fingerprints appear on the plastic bags? Why had she Googled, "Do police check drains for blood?" Why had she been caught on CCTV shopping for tape and cleaning supplies with Nathan just days after Becky vanished? Her answers were vague and inconsistent. At one point in the interviews, Shauna quietly asked if she would, quote, "go to prison for lying." She looked nervous, not devastated, just calculating. For investigators, the tapes were telling. Nathan had confessed to killing Becky, and Shauna, though not directly admitting involvement, had clearly helped cover it up. Together, they had created a cruel fantasy, then turned it into an irreversible reality. And now, they would face the consequences in court. As detectives pieced together the evidence, it became clear. Becky Watts' murder was no accident. It was a calculated, cold-blooded plan. The full scope of the murder emerged during the investigation. On October 5, 2015, the trial of Nathan Matthews and Shauna Hoare began at Bristol Crown Court. The courtroom was packed with reporters, grieving family members, and a public eager to understand how such a senseless crime had unfolded. Nathan Matthews was charged with murder, kidnapping, and perverting the course of justice. Shauna Hoare faced charges of manslaughter, assisting an offender, and perverting the course of justice. The prosecution's argument was chilling. Becky Watts was killed as part of a sexually motivated kidnap fantasy orchestrated by the couple. The court heard that Nathan had carefully planned the crime, bringing tape, handcuffs, and a stun device to the house. Prosecutors said the plan was never to scare Becky, it was to abduct and dominate her, a twisted fantasy built on control and power. Nathan's defense claimed the death was an accident. His barrister told the jury he only wanted to frighten Becky, not kill her. He admitted to suffocating her, but insisted it was unintentional. But the sheer level of preparation, the tools, the messages, the saw, the dismemberment, made the accident theory hard to believe. The jury listened to graphic forensic testimony. Photos of the crime scene were shown, and details of how Becky's body was dismembered and stored were laid bare. The audience in the gallery wept. Even seasoned jurors looked visibly shaken. Shauna's defense took a different approach. She blamed Nathan entirely. Her legal team argued that she had been manipulated and controlled by her boyfriend and had no idea what he was planning. She maintained she never saw Becky's body, never took part in the killing, and only helped clean up under pressure. But the prosecution revealed messages and search histories showing her discussing abduction, murder, and disposal. Her fingerprints were on the bags. She had helped shop for cleaning materials. The trial lasted 6 weeks, with over 60 witnesses called. Friends, neighbors, digital analysts, and forensic experts all gave evidence. Becky's family sat through every painful day, hoping for justice. In his closing remarks, the prosecutor described Becky as a vulnerable, innocent girl who had been targeted in her own home by people she should have been able to trust. The jury was sent out to deliberate. After months of agony, the verdict was now just days away. Would justice finally be served for Becky Watts? On November 11, 2015, after 3 days of deliberation, the jury returned with their verdicts in the trial of Nathan Matthews and Shauna Hoare, the moment the nation had waited months for. In a silent courtroom, the jury foreman stood and read the decision. Nathan Matthews was found guilty of murder, guilty of kidnapping, guilty of perverting the course of justice, guilty of preventing lawful burial. He showed little emotion as the words were read, no tears, no visible regret. His cold demeanor matched what many had witnessed throughout the trial. The courtroom then turned to Shauna Hoare. She was found not guilty of murder, not guilty of manslaughter, but guilty of manslaughter by gross negligence, guilty of perverting the course of justice, guilty of assisting an offender. Her reaction was more visible. She gasped and cried quietly. But the jury had made it clear, though she may not have physically killed Becky, she had known, helped, and covered it up. When the verdicts were announced, Becky's father, Darren Galsworthy, broke down in tears. The courtroom heard quiet sobs from her friends and relatives. For months, they had waited, grieving a daughter, sitting through graphic evidence, listening to lies. Now, at last, justice had a name. In sentencing, the judge called the crime a grotesque and senseless murder, motivated by a morbid sexual interest and carried out with chilling callousness. Nathan Matthews was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 33 years. Shauna Hoare was sentenced to 17 years in prison for her role in the killing and cover-up. The judge made clear that both had betrayed Becky's trust, and their actions were not only criminal but deeply inhumane. The public reacted strongly. Many believed Shauna should have received a harsher sentence. Others couldn't comprehend how anyone could participate in such a cruel crime and not stop it. But most agreed Becky had not died in vain. Her case had revealed the dangers of hidden abuse, the darkness behind closed doors, and the need to protect vulnerable young people, even in their own homes. Outside court, Darren Galsworthy gave a short statement. Becky was a beautiful daughter. She didn't deserve what happened to her. No child ever does. In the months following the verdict, the ripple effects of Becky Watts' murder continued to be felt within her family, across Bristol, and throughout the UK. For Becky's loved ones, there was no true peace. While justice had been served, the loss was permanent. Her father, Darren Galsworthy, became a quiet advocate for missing children and victims of violent crime. He gave a few interviews but largely withdrew from public life, trying to process the unimaginable betrayal by his own son. Angie Galsworthy, Becky's stepmother, also faced emotional devastation. She had raised both Becky and Nathan, and now had lost them both, one to murder, the other to prison. Their home was sold shortly after the trial. The memories were too painful to bear. Becky's biological mother, Tanya Watts, expressed her heartbreak through statements and memorials. The family worked together to honor Becky's memory, including setting up charity walks and supporting causes for vulnerable youth. In the broader community, Becky's murder ignited discussions about warning signs in domestic abuse, teenage safety, and how controlling, violent fantasies can grow unnoticed, especially behind closed doors. Media outlets began producing documentaries, talk shows, and investigative reports focused on the case. The press dubbed the crime the suitcase murder, referencing the grotesque way Becky's remains had been hidden. But the public began to reject the sensationalism. They wanted to remember Becky, not just her death, but her life. Schools in Bristol held assemblies on personal safety and mental health. Teen support groups were expanded. Police emphasized the importance of reporting suspicious behavior, even within families. The case also exposed the power of digital forensics in solving modern crimes. Without Nathan and Shauna's search history, text messages, and GPS records, much of the truth might never have been uncovered. The investigation became a case study for law enforcement training across the country. But perhaps the greatest impact was personal. Becky's story resonated because she was so ordinary, a shy, creative teenager just beginning to find herself again. Her murder was a chilling reminder that violence doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes it hides behind smiles, inside families. Becky's bedroom was eventually turned into a quiet memorial, filled with her favorite things: photos, books, music posters. A place to remember her not as a victim, but as a daughter, a friend, and a life that should have been protected. Her voice was stolen, but her story would not be forgotten. After the trial, both Nathan Matthews and Shauna Hoare began serving their lengthy prison sentences, but their time behind bars would be far from quiet. Nathan Matthews, sentenced to life with a minimum of 33 years, was sent to HMP Long Lartin, a high-security prison housing some of the UK's most dangerous offenders. Isolated and widely hated by fellow inmates, Nathan was reportedly placed on suicide watch soon after his arrival. Inside, he remained withdrawn, just as he had during his trial. Prison staff noted he rarely interacted with others and showed no real remorse for his crime. Other inmates, repulsed by the details of Becky's murder, reportedly targeted him. Due to the sensitive nature of his offense, Nathan was moved into protective custody within the prison. Shauna Hoare, meanwhile, began serving her 17-year sentence in HMP Bronzefield, a women's prison in Surrey. Unlike Nathan, she initially tried to blend in. She portrayed herself as a victim, manipulated and abused by Nathan, hoping for sympathy. But word of her role in Becky's death followed her inside. Other prisoners, particularly mothers and young women, were outraged by her involvement in the killing of a teenage girl. She became a target of verbal abuse and physical threats. Several reports emerged of her being attacked in prison, with one inmate allegedly scalding her with boiling water. In 2017, Shauna was moved to a different prison for her own protection. Officials placed her on a restricted contact list and monitored her movements carefully. Despite her claims of innocence during the trial, Shauna made inconsistent statements in later years, at times admitting she had known more than she said, but never taking full responsibility. Her appeals for early release or sentence reduction were denied. Both Nathan and Shauna filed appeals in the years following their convictions. Nathan's appeal was quickly dismissed. The court reaffirmed that the crime was exceptionally brutal and premeditated. Shauna also attempted to challenge her conviction, but failed. The evidence of her involvement was simply too strong. To this day, neither has offered a full, truthful account of what happened in Becky's final moments. For Becky's family, knowing her killers behind bars brought a measure of justice, but not peace. Because even with long sentences and steel bars, some crimes stay alive in memory forever, especially when the monster was someone you once trusted. Though her life was tragically cut short, Becky Watts' legacy continues to echo through the hearts of her family, friends, and the nation. What began as a heartbreaking case of a missing teenager turned into a powerful reminder of the importance of safeguarding, awareness, and speaking up. After the trial, Becky's family focused on turning their grief into purpose. Her father, Darren Galsworthy, stayed largely out of the spotlight.